Hello, this is Kathy Malsh, your instructor for your nutrition class. Welcome to the narrated slideshow for Chapter 2, Nutrition Tools, Standards, and Guidelines, or What Do These Numbers Mean Anyway? This Prezi slideshow and the reference supporting materials can be found on our class Moodle page. This material can also be found in your textbook, Nutrition Concepts and Controversies by Sizer and Whitney, 14th edition. I apologize ahead of time for any annoying speech patterns and amateur editing you may witness. We do what we have to do, so here we go. The nutrition standards that are referenced in this chapter refer to, if you open the inside cover of your textbook, you will see charts of numbers that follow according to these guidelines. The dietary reference intake is kind of the umbrella term for these numbers being attributed to recommended dietary allowances, estimated energy requirements, adequate intake, tolerable upper intake levels, etc. You don't really need to know which numbers fall under which of those subcategories. Just know that they come from a number of different sources that are set by committees that meet periodically to review the latest research and set values for vitamins, most minerals, carbohydrates, protein, fats, fiber, water, and energy, otherwise known as calories. These numbers that we use are used in the United States and Canada. Some countries will use different numbers based on their relevant research for their geographical area or their population that might have unique environmental conditions, health problems, other characteristics that are appropriate for them. But the numbers that are noted inside your textbook are used in the United States and Canada. These numbers are based on, like I said, recent research that gets reviewed by a committee of experts, and what they do is follow what's known as bell curve studies or balance studies. And this can also be found on page 36 of your textbook. But essentially what happens is research like this is done on a population group or sample size, and they're able to measure the intake of each individual within this study. And then their metabolic waste products that are measured in such things as urine, feces, sweat, respirations. They can tell each individual in that study how much of a particular nutrient they are utilizing based on what they're given. And from that we can tell what the requirements are. So within that study, each person is plotted kind of under, along this graph where the axis, the horizontal axis, is the amount of a particular nutrient that may be needed, and the vertical axis is how many people fall into that category. So as you go along here, at the low ends of the ranges are a small portion of people that need just a very little bit of that nutrient. And as you go up to higher amounts of the nutrient, more and more people fall under that curve as to what their particular needs are. And then as you get higher amounts, the population starts to lessen. So this makes sense in that if you were to take the average person within this study, they're going to need the average amount of that nutrient, or the highest amount that you see here. Now we could use that to set the required recommended intake for people, but if we set it at this average, we would be leaving out, neglecting the upper half of our population who need more than that. So what we tend to do is this group of experts reviewing this research will set the recommendation somewhere out around here. Well, it'll cover nearly all the people in our population. It covers about 98% or so of our population. So they would set the requirement out here, knowing full well that there's going to be a number of people that don't need quite that much, but it's not going to do harm to them to set that target out a little further. So the target is set where it'll cover most people in that, most healthy people within that population without doing harm. Now that again means that if you don't know exactly where your individual needs lie, you might be one of these people that needs it down here. You could be someone under the average, you could be someone above average. it's hard to tell without going through a metabolic study yourself. So know that if the recommendation is here and you were to do an intake study, just assessing your own intake of something, if you're getting roughly 80% of the recommended amount, you're probably safe, because we do have a pretty good cushion built into these numbers. So these numbers are meant to accommodate the needs for nearly all healthy people. And this is important to note, that it's healthy people. People who have special medical conditions or special dietary needs may not fit under this umbrella. They may need differing amounts of different nutrients depending on their condition. So it's intended to be for all healthy people. In fact, the origin was originally for the military, to make sure that we could feed our soldiers adequately for them to be able to perform in the field of battle. So military personnel, healthy people, those are the people for which these numbers were geared toward. It's also to help us set policy for nutrition targets going forward for our population. But again, people with significant medical conditions are the exceptions to this. They may not fit into our healthy recommendations quite so easily. Now, energy requirements, meaning calories, are set a little differently. Under estimated energy requirements, we're not going to use the same place on that curve. We're not as generous with that. So if I go back to that curve where our nutrients were set out here, somewhere around here, our energy requirements are set at that halfway or average point. And the reason for this is that if we set it out here, we would be doing potential harm by grossly overestimating the calorie needs for people in the lower half of our population. Because that does carry a health price tag, we don't want to overestimate our calorie needs. So we do set it at the midpoint and tell people that theirs could be higher or lower accordingly. Okay, daily values, what are they? So these are numbers that you would see if you're looking on a package side panel. If you look at the nutrient label on a package of food, you would see something called daily values and percent daily values noted. They're really an education tool for the public to be able to assess how well a serving of a particular product might meet their estimated needs. So it's really to help, say you're comparing product A versus product B, you might use the daily values to see which one is going to give you the better fit for protein or calcium or iron or something, or not get too much sodium. So it's a way to compare and see how much of my daily allowance am I likely to use, but it's based on an average person. They use a token 2,000 calorie a day person as their reference person. And so they set the guidelines for, if you were that 2,000 calorie a day person, how much of those different nutrients would you be estimated to need, and how would a serving of this food basically fit that? To me, it's most people don't get it. They don't quite understand what the number means and how to use it for their health, but it's a comparative tool, and that's what I want you to know. So the effectiveness of that message, it varies. Okay, moving on to dietary recommendations. In a different context, we can refer to the dietary guidelines. And these are, again, guidelines that are reviewed every 5 to 10 years. So right now we've got a set of guidelines that are geared for our population for the years 2015 to 2020. And these guidelines, again, a panel of experts gets together, reviews research, but they're a little bit more generic guidelines. They're not so number specific driven like the other recommended intake guidelines. So these are things to help people know, okay, how do I translate those numbers into everyday practices? So for example, this is a panel of what you might see for, let me just zoom in on that a little bit here. So if you look at this, it's going to say, a healthy eating pattern can include some of these following guidelines. So just to zoom out on that here. Okay, so one of the guidelines is follow a healthy eating pattern across the lifespan. And this would be a way to do it. A healthy eating pattern includes, and it's got fruits, vegetables, protein, dairy, grains, oils, etc. And it tells you to limit calories from added sugar, saturated fat, things that can do potential harm, reducing sodium, and so on. But it encourages you to get more of the beneficial nutrients and to be careful about nutrients that could be potentially harmful. So there's a number of different guidelines that follow the same pattern. Okay, so let's go back out a little bit there. Come on. There we go. Okay. So moving on from that, this is another way you could interpret those same guidelines. So this is just an education tool that takes those guidelines and does it in a different pictorial fashion. So in this slide you can see they'll say focus on a healthy eating pattern rich in vegetables, fruits, whole grains, seafood, legumes, nuts, and then limit foods from added sugars, refined grains, meaning white flour-based foods, red and processed meats and saturated fats, and then it notes at the bottom eggs, coffee, things like that are okay. So those are things that you'd want to be moderate about. And then also as a follow-up to that are the USDA food patterns, and these are again found in your book starting on page 40, and it takes each food group. This is again a sampling of the USDA food patterns. It takes each food group and tells us what the serving size is for that food group. So like for fruits, it'll say 1 cup fresh, frozen, cooked, or canned fruit, a half a cup dried fruit, a cup of 100% fruit juice, and it'll tell you the nutrients that this food group is strong in. So again, if we look at if we zoom in on that a little bit, that's what that panel tells you right there. At the top, you'll see which nutrients are strong, and then it gives you examples of what foods fit into that, and then any limitations that you might want to be aware of. And then again, the serving size is there. So food group by food group, it helps us with making selections that can be healthiest for us. All right, talk a little bit about history here. Diet education has come a long way from your parents, grandparents, etc. If you were to ask people from that generation, what do they remember about learning about healthy eating, they would probably tell you, whoops, sorry, wrong way. Let's go back. Okay, let's try that again. So going from this, the history of diet education icons, the first one that your parents and grandparents might have been familiar with is what's called, often referred to as the basic 4 food groups. So this started back in the 1950s, and it's a pretty primitive slide or education tool as far as it goes. And you may, let me see if I can zoom in a little bit here, you may see like foods were divided up into categories such as the milk group, the meat group, the vegetable and fruit group, and the bread and cereal group. And within each of those headings, you got a couple of examples of what some of those foods might entail. But again, it's kind of dull, pretty primitive looking, but that's what we had pretty much from the 1950s until the 1990s. So for about 40 years, that's what people referred to when they talked about healthy food. It was the basic 4. And sometimes they would picture it in just boxes, you know, like a part of a square, something like that. Then along came a pyramid, our first pyramid. And some of you may remember seeing this when you were much younger. So the original food pyramid was pretty dramatic change compared to the basic 4. So we had more food groups to talk about. So we broke out our food groups into, we still had breads and cereals, and grains at the pastas at the bottom, and then we had vegetables separated out, fruits here, and then as you went up, meat, poultry, fish, dried beans, eggs and nuts, milk, yogurt, and cheese over here, and then at the top were foods to be used sparingly, such as fats, oils, and sweets. So the concept of this was there really aren't any bad foods, they're just foods that you want to have more of down here at the bottom, moderate amounts here in the middle, and very little here at the top. Now note that this pyramid was very carb heavy. That was at the time where our focus was on cutting back on fats. We weren't even really separating saturated fats as much, but we were just saying everything should be low fat, low fat, low fat for heart disease, and carbs are great, carbs are great. Well, we know that's probably not so true now, but back then, this is based on the research we had, this is what our message was. So it was go ahead and have carbs, but for a while that was okay, but then people were like, but you know, aren't there better choices within each food group? This doesn't tell us much for how to make the best choices within each food group like that. So, you know, we thought that we could do better. So let me just get this back in focus here. Okay, so the next revised pyramid was this one, And this was from 2005. So again, we went from the 90s to 2005. Notice that the pyramids are not horizontal blocks, but they're vertical stripes. We've added in an activity factor here to encourage people to exercise. The good thing about this was it was the first interactive tool. You could go online. Now internet access was more accessible. You could go online to mypyramid.gov and create a profile for yourself and be able to put your foods into that profile, into that program, and it would tell you, give you some feedback on what things you were doing well with and what things you might want to do better with. The other thing that I think they didn't do so hot with is you're supposed to intuitively notice that the width of the stripes vary, and so the narrow stripes are again the ones that you want to have smaller amounts of. The wider stripes would be things that you want to have wider amounts or larger amounts from those food groups. They did do a better job on the website about telling you within grains, let's try to make some, more choices whole grain, and let's try to use the most nutrient dense fruits and vegetables and lower saturated fat in some of the protein foods. So it tried to differentiate better choices within each, but I think, it was better, but it still wasn't where we needed to be. So we had that in the early 2000s. And this is what we're currently using. This came out in 2011, the MyPlate. What I like about the MyPlate is it's a plate. So it's a recognizable icon that people can relate to. I'm not so sure people ever really related so much to the triangles and pyramids of things when they were doing comparative, trying to compare their intake to what the guidelines were. So I think this is a vast improvement. And the key message here is, yes, all these food groups are important, but you don't, the typical American plate, most of this would have been your entree or your big piece of meat, maybe, a big blob of potatoes or rice or pasta, and then maybe a tiny little bit of vegetable. This was to give it more proportionality to it. And the key message here was that the takeaway message was make half your plate fruits and vegetables. That if people could focus on increasing fruits and vegetables on half their plate, the rest of it would kind of follow along in more appropriate proportions. The ChooseMyPlate.gov website has a ton of resources and links to be able to use for yourself, your family, your friends. If you're a professional who's doing any kind of nutrition education with children or families or adults, there's lots of resources on this website that you can use. Education materials that can be printed off, interactive games, tools for analysis. They used to have a pretty terrific diet analysis program that we used in this class called Super Tracker, where you could, again, set up a profile for yourself, put in your daily intake, and it would analyze it for each and every nutrient, how your intake stacked up against the recommendations. They have decided to discontinue that because there are so many apps out there. They said that they didn't need to do it here. Unfortunately, this used to be free, and now all the apps that are out there are charging premium rates if you really want to get detailed information. So I'm hopeful that maybe someday it'll come back, but not so sure at this point. All right, let's go look at portions now. So when we talk about the epidemic of obesity that we're having issues with in our population, which also incidentally corresponds with type 2 diabetes and other things that we'll talk about, is it really our foods that have changed, or is it the quantity of foods that we're consuming that have changed? And it's probably both. We know it's not an evolutionary change that's accounted for the changes in the weights of our population, so it's got to be what we're eating or how much we're eating. So this series of slides will tell you and give you an idea of how those trends have compared. So when we're looking at this, let's zoom in a little bit to the right side one first. Okay, so portion sizes then and now. This is looking at, a typical fast food meal from back in the 1960s, or so. I don't know if you can see that. Let's see, widen that out just a little bit. Okay, so 1960, sorry about that, on the left is a typical fast food meal, and then in 2011. And you can see the differences in sizes and what the corresponding increase in calories are. So one way I can give you a frame of reference is back in the day when McDonald's, as our sample would indicate, back in the day when McDonald's first started opening its restaurants, an adult would go in and order a hamburger, a small French fry, a small drink. and that would be typical meal. Those are what we put in Happy Meals now, and that size is pretty much limited to children, and adults are encouraged to purchase much larger portions and therefore correspondingly much larger amounts of calories, sugar, sodium, saturated fat. So all the things that we're trying to be mindful of are showing up in large quantities because they're offering us for pretty good value. It's the whole marketing trend is give us good return on our money. So for just a little bit more money, you can get a lot more food, and thus a lot more of the nutrients that we're trying to be careful of. So that's an example. And then if we look over here, you can see, movie popcorn. It's not unusual to see that big bucket of movie popcorn now, which has over 600 calories in it. And the bagels, if you see the bagels on the right, that little bagel on the left-hand side of that pair of bagels is what was typical when bagels first became a popular mainstream kind of food. Those are like the little Lender bagels you might find in the freezer section now. And then the bagels on the right are what you find in the bread section or at a restaurant like a Dunkin' Donuts or such. And the equivalent to that bagel on the right is like having 5 pieces of bread. So again, you can see the portion sizes are going up dramatically. Same with sodas. It used to be that a typical soda was 8 ounces. Then it was 12 ounces. Now it's hard to find something as small as even 12 ounces. Most of them are 16, 20, 24, 32. And so you get accordingly a lot more calories, and all those calories are coming from sugar. So we tend to think that it's, besides the type of food that we're eating, it's our sense of what a normal portion of food is has gone up dramatically. We eat more foods away from home, and when those food portions are offered to us in larger quantities, that becomes our quote new normal. And this translates even to the home that you'll see in just a moment. Let me zoom back out here a minute and show you the next one. So average dinner plate sizes. You can see the one on the left is in American restaurants, the one in the middle American homes, and the one on the right that looks like a little kiddie plate is what you'd see as a plate size in Europe. So our portion size, the bigger the plate, the more food you tend to put on it. And even that's trickling into our homes, where if you go to buy china for your home now, it tends to be larger size now than it used to be. In fact, I have a family member who said, I needed to update my china, my everyday china. So she went and bought a new set, and it wouldn't even fit lying down on her cabinet. She had to stack it on its side because it was wider than a standard cabinet was from when the old sets were around. So that gives you an idea of how that's changed. On the right is another frame of reference that people can use to estimate portion sizes. So let me zoom in on this a minute. So like a serving, if you're looking at the palm of your hand, might be a serving of a 3-ounce serving of a meat, poultry, something like that would fit in the palm of your hand. That's a pretty small portion. You're not going to find that in a restaurant to be that small, but that's what normal, quote unquote, normal is supposed to be, and then what we see there. And then you've got, a fist estimates a cupful of, say, a vegetable or something like that. A small piece of fruit would be the size of a baseball, and so on. So this slide kind of gives you some, again, a frame of reference for what is normal here. If you look down on the lower corner there, those series of dice, that's all for what 1.5 ounces of cheese is. So next time you do your cheese cracker platter, think about how many pairs of die are on that plate as an idea. So we have to sort of re-reference what our normal portions are to help people make better choices there. All right, let's talk about labels, the mystery of product labels, and this is where some of your worksheets come into. But let's go through what's required to be on a label and the information that to help you decipher that on the worksheets. So first of all, what's required information is a common name. So your package has to tell you, is this cereal? Is it crackers? Is it pasta? Is it cottage cheese? Whatever the product is, it's got to have a common name to it. And then you have to be told how much you're buying. Is it sold by weight? So many ounces or so many pounds. Is it a measure? So many cups or fluid ounces. Is it a count? You're purchasing, there's 16 of these things in this package. It's got to tell you some quantity for what you're purchasing. And then the ingredients at the bottom of the nutrition label are listed in descending order by weight, not volume. So what that means is the heaviest ingredients come first and the lighter ingredients come later in the list. So this is a way for you to know what's the most predominant ingredients. However, not all ingredients relevance come in terms of weight. So there are some exceptional things that don't weigh a lot, but they have a bigger impact nutritionally. And a lot of your fats fall into that because fats are not particularly dense, so they may not show up at the top of the weight of the list in terms of weight, but they could pack a bigger impact in terms of the effect of saturated fat on your heart health, for example. And then the nutrition facts, the nutrient facts have to be, this is what you're seeing kind of on the side panel of a product, any of these products here like that, those are the nutrient facts. So these labels have been changing, going through more of a update in the last couple of years. So before, you had to really kind of search for where the information is, how to interpret this label. So many people were under the mistaken impression that the numbers, again, let's see if I can, go in a little bit closer here, that these numbers on this left-hand side, all the numbers that you're seeing were for the package of food. And you would want to know that this is for a serving of food from that package. So it's got to tell you, it has to tell you what the serving size is, which you can see on this one is like 2/3 of a cup, and the servings per container, I think, says 8 on that. So all of these numbers are for 1/8 of this package. And if you would normally eat half of that package, then you've got to multiply all those numbers by 4 to get an accurate picture of what you're really consuming. The new guidelines say we need to make this easier for people to really know this. So you'll see bold prints and bigger fonts on things so the number of servings per container are now in bold up here. So you can see 8 servings per container. The calories are bigger and bolder. And the numbers of the daily values that I mentioned before are on the right, now on the left. I'm not sure if that's better or worse, but it does highlight some of the nutrients, the key nutrients that we're trying to be mindful of. So it's supposed to make it easier for you to be able to see what kind of numbers. If you're looking at protein or iron or calcium or sodium, it should be easier to find that information. But know that it's per serving, and you need to know how many servings you're consuming from that package. And the newer guidelines are supposed to say, let's use some common sense here. If this happens on snack bags or chips or things like that, where you might consider eating the whole package, in a matter of fairly short time as a snack, and yet you look on the label and it says there's 3 servings in a package. Are you really going to share that with 2 other people? Probably not. So the label needs to be more realistic in terms of the information that you're supposed to be learning from. Okay, so that's how labels are changing to help us get new and better information. And this is where I would say you would want to look at. I'm just going to put this on the screen just so you can see what this looks like. So one of the handouts that I gave you was this what Nutrition Facts label tells you. So I don't expect you to read this from here, just see what it looks like. And what it's asking you to do is take the information from this label and be able to answer these questions about that. So if you can, I think it's pretty straightforward. If you can try your hand at going through that label, seeing what the serving size is and how many calories are in a portion of that, and etc. So see if you can go through and answer the questions on that, and then we can just double check our answers when we meet up in class. Okay, so let's see here. Moving on. Okay. I'm not going to play this whole thing. I just want to show you what this is, and hopefully it'll work. But embedded in this Prezi slideshow is a little YouTube video. It's kind of a silly little film, but it does give you some basic idea about information. So let's take a look at it, see if we can get it to pull up for us.
Welcome back to Are You Smarter Than a Food Label? The game show that tests the food label knowledge of ordinary, everyday, average people. I'm your host, Label Man, the FDA's graphic representation of the Nutrition Facts label. Oh, really? Our next contestant hails from the lettuce capital of the U.S. His friends call him Bulldog, but say he wouldn't hurt a fly. All the way from sunny California, please give a warm nutrition facts label welcome to Mr. Tim Patrick. Tim will ask you the question, and you'll have the chance to answer. Or go to the food label. Or simply pass. However, you're allowed only one pass before you're disqualified. Let's get started. First question is multiple choice. A serving size is determined by A, the size of the package it's in, B, a predetermined portion that's easily found on the nutrition facts label, or C, the weight of the person eating that particular serving.
I'll go with B, a predetermined portion that's easily found on the nutrition facts label.
Correct! A package can easily have more than one serving. Remember, the nutrition facts label has the serving size and the number of servings, as well as other important nutritional information. Next question, true or false? The calorie section of the nutrition facts label shows the number of calories in that particular package.
I'll have to say true, label man.
Oh, I'm sorry, but it shows the number of calories per serving, not per package. Next question. What is the 5-20 rule? A, the formula for the number of calories it takes to run 5 miles in 20 minutes. B, the body's standard burn rate for fat in a food. Or C, a way to tell if a food is low or high in a particular nutrient.
That's easy, label man. The answer is C, a way to tell if a food is low or high in a particular nutrient.
That's right. If a food's daily value, or DV, of a nutrient is 5% or less, it's low in that nutrient. 20% or more means it's high. This can be bad or good depending on if it's a nutrient you want more or less of. Can you give me an example of a nutrient on each end of the scale, Tim?
Something like saturated fat would be a good thing to get 5% or less of, I would think. And you probably want a high number, 20% DV or more, or something like calcium or fiber, probably.
Good choices. Other nutrients to get more of include vitamins A, C, and iron. And those to get less of include saturated fat, cholesterol, and sodium. Moving along to our next question, true or false? It's impossible to truly know the nutritional value of a meal when you're away from home. Tim?
Well, I know that many restaurants are including healthy choices on their menus now, like light fares or low sodium or low fat selections. I'm not sure if they include the nutritional value, however. Oh, I did see the nutrition facts listed on a napkin at one takeout place the other day. I'm gonna have to go with false, label man.
That's right. Many restaurants and food chains are making the nutritional information available on their websites, their menus at the restaurant, even on the wrappers of their takeout food in some instances. If you can't find it, just ask. Tim, you're doing pretty good so far. You've come down to the final question. Get this one right and you'll win the grand prize. Answer it incorrectly and you go home empty-handed. Are you ready to put it all on the line?
I am, label man.
Okay, here we go. What are the 3 things to remember when making healthy food choices? You have 10 seconds. Okay, Tim, let's see how you answered.
That would be calories, servings, and percent daily value.
That's correct! You're our grand prize winner! Congratulations! Make sure you join us next time on Are You Smarter Than a Food Label? Bye-bye, everybody!
Okay, so you get the idea about that. This is just to help you learn about what kind of information you can find on a different food label and how that helps you interpret that. Let's talk now a little bit about nutrient claims and health claims. So this is the stuff that's listed on the front of the package often. So you'll see a package could have any number of these particular claims that you see here. So things that are, claimed to be organic, made with real fruit, fat-free, 100% natural, which by the way doesn't really mean a whole heck of a lot because there's not a lot of legislative backup to that. 100% natural is a very generic term. But many of these other claims have to have some numbers to back them up in order to be able to use them. So if somebody's going to be claimed to be heart healthy and use that heart symbol that you see there, there's got to be certain regulations that get met with that. So if you want to know what those claims mean, legally, then you can look at your book on page 55. There's a number of definitions of what each of those terms mean. If something's reduced or sugar-free or low-fat, high in excellent source of, etc. Now I put also another handout to help you out with this. This one here, I'll put this here. So on this one, this is the Colorado State University Nutrient Claims on Food Labels, and I think this is a pretty good handout. I've included that. Let's go back, zoom that back out here. Okay, so I've included that so that you can see what some of those definitions are in addition to the ones in your book. I think they do a pretty good job of saying legally what has to be on the package, nutrient-wise, in order to use that claim on the front of the package. So this will help you do one of the other worksheets that we're going to do in just a moment. But that sheet is also on our middle page. Okay, let's bring that up a little closer. Okay. So here's another film. I will put the references for these films at the end of this slideshow. These were films that I found on YouTube that are on our Moodle page and then embedded in this Prezi slideshow. But pretty good information. This is based on Canada's version of like CNN or a cable news network show, but this takes place in Canada. So when you look at some of the foods they talk about or the packaging, it may not be brands that you see, but you'll get the idea. Some of them are, some of them aren't. So I'm just going to show you a brief example of what this show is telling us. So here we go on this one.
Grocery store, baskets in hand, eyes focused on popular food products.
Investigating whether companies are playing fast and loose when it comes to food labeling.
Start the day with Nutella. Everything from breakfast to dinner.
Healthy request. Sounds good.
I'm sold.
We're finding a healthy diet of food claims.
100% natural, garden vegetable.
Bread with veggies?
Seems that's the hype these days. But are company claims supported by the facts, or is it just food fiction? How important are the labeling claims to your decision?
That's the first thing I look at.
I'm a dad, so I like to get, certain types of nutrition to my boys. They're still growing, so they need a lot of protein.
Quite a bit. I used to be not in the best of health, so it became a habit over time.
To find out about these healthy food claims, we check out and meet up with a guy who can help us read between the lines. Hey, Yoni.
Hi, Erica.
Good to see you again.
Nice to see you.
Dr. Yoni Friedhoff runs a health and nutrition center in Ottawa. He's been called Canada's nutritional watchdog. How would you describe some of the marketing tactics companies use to get people to buy their stuff?
Well, they'll use anything and everything that they can to try to convince consumers that what's in those packages is health food.
How successful do you think the marketing is?
I think it's extremely successful. Every aisle of the supermarket is preying on us. They're preying on our psychologies. They're preying on our beliefs. It's not fair.
Let's start with the first meal of the day. A popular breakfast item, Nutella. You know, the one that's spreading the message that breakfast loves Nutella.
Knives, spoons, fingers, and cheeks. Made with roasted hazelnuts. Breakfast loves Nutella.
Precious Chong's family loves it too. Her 9-year-old son Jack eats this sweet treat 3 times a week. He's nuts for Nutella.
Delicious.
She first ate the stuff as a child in Europe and says now it's a staple in her home. When you're serving Nutella for Jack in the morning, how much do you give him?
Like between a teaspoon and a tablespoonful in his oatmeal.
Do you know anything about the ingredients of Nutella?
I know it's like hazelnuts and sugar.
Any idea how much sugar is in there?
I don't know.
The manufacturer says it can be part of a balanced breakfast. But is Nutella really a good way to start the day? What do you think of this product?
Well, I think that it is spreadable candy.
Candy. Why?
Well, basically everything you spread on that piece of bread will be sugar.
So just how much sugar does Nutella pack? It says each serving is 1 tablespoon. So I'm going to just get a tablespoon of this, and that has 11 grams of sugar. Okay, here we go.
Nutella, really, it's a bit of whey powder, so we'll put some whey powder, and it's a bit of skim milk powder, so we'll put that too. Some cocoa powder, we've got cocoa powder, and now everybody knows there's hazelnuts in there, but I don't know if everybody knows that there's only 2.5 hazelnuts in that tablespoon. And then there is just shy, 1 gram shy, of 3 teaspoons of sugar.
That is a ton of sugar on my toast.
It is a lot of sugar on your toast, and you know, a lot of people, they say, well, you know, we know it's not healthy, but I'm not sure people know just how much this actually is.
All that sugar in just 1 serving, and Friedhoff thinks people are eating more than that.
The label, it's swimming in Nutella. I wonder if 2 tablespoons would make it look more like that label.
And once you make it 2 tablespoons of Nutella, you're eating 5.5 teaspoons of sugar. And that's not all. You've got another ingredient down there. What's that?
I do. This is chocolate icing.
You think there's a comparison?
Well, in fact, there is less sugar, tablespoon for tablespoon, in this chocolate icing than in that Nutella.
The company says it doesn't promote the nutritional value of Nutella. If you eat it with some whole grain toast, fruit, and milk, it can be part of a complete breakfast. But that's little consolation for our Toronto mom. In a serving of Nutella, which is a tablespoon, there are 11 grams of sugar.
Wow.
Do you know how much that is?
No,
It's almost 3 teaspoons.
that's a lot of sugar. So basically I'm giving a chocolate bar to my son for breakfast.
The fact that Nutella markets itself as a breakfast food, sells itself that way, and knowing how much sugar's in it, how do you feel about that?
Oh, I mean, it's a sham. It shouldn't be a breakfast food. It should be like a dessert.
The latest in a long list of unhappy Nutella fans. A couple of years ago, the manufacturer made national news in the US when it was sued for false advertising.
I thought it was at least as nutritious as peanut butter, maybe a little bit more, and that was just the impression I got from the commercial.
The company had to pay its customers $3 million.
They may have tweaked their advertising to tone down the impression it's healthy, but this sugar cop says it's still leaving a false impression. Why are companies allowed to market their products as though they're good for you?
Companies are allowed to say whatever they can get away with saying. Now, they're like teenagers. Their job is to push the envelope, to see what they can get away with, to sell as much product as possible.
One of the slogans for this product is "Breakfast loves Nutella."
Well, kids may love Nutella, and maybe breakfast does too, but I'm not so sure that health does.
Let's put this one away.
Indeed.
Time for us to turn the tables on this label, change food fiction into food fact. So let's make breakfast loves Nutella, Nutella loves sugar.
With breakfast done, time for lunch.
Healthy request. Sounds good.
I'm sold.
Throw it in.
You bet. So we pick up some Campbell's Healthy Request soup. So when you see the word healthy request on that, what does that mean to you?
It would mean to me there would be more vegetables in there. It would have some type of whole grain in there.
Healthy request? Well, I'd have to look at the ingredients before I figured out if it is healthy.
Vegetables and nice looking things on that. So I would think, yeah, that's something that I would consider.
So, just how healthy is this soup? So we've got this Campbell's soup. It's called Healthy Request, and there are a lot of health-related things on this label.
There's no question that label screams healthy. I mean, even if you look at the spoon, you don't see soup, you just see a spoonful of vegetables right above a logo that's got a heart with the word healthy on top of it. So this is, I would imagine, the marketing point is heart-healthy soup.
So let's look at the amount of sodium in here. It has 470 milligrams of sodium per serving. How's that number?
Well, first, 470 milligrams of sodium in a serving of soup might not be a small number for someone who is worried and concerned for real reasons about sodium. So people with heart disease, that's actually quite a lot for a serving of soup. But I have a question. How much is the serving of soup in this case?
Says per serving of 250 milliliters, but this has almost 400 in it, in this container.
And so that would be almost 750 milligrams of sodium in that container.
If you ate the whole thing.
Now, I wonder who wouldn't eat the whole thing. I mean, look at this container. So it is a single-serve container. I say that because you can't reseal it.
Campbell says it uses the standard serving size for soup set by the government. That way shoppers can make a fair comparison. But it looks as if Campbell's could be breaking government rules around labeling. If a food product could reasonably be eaten at a single sitting, the company has to give you the nutritional info for the whole container. How misleading is it then to give the sodium for a serving size that is not the entire thing?
I think it's very misleading. You know, especially when you've got a container that clearly is something people would regularly consume all at once.
And that's not the only food fiction going on.
If you want to know how much sodium, it's the same amount of sodium as you would get if you ate this entire bowl of potato chips.
Well, you wouldn't sit down and eat an entire big bowl of potato chips like that.
No, and if you're making your own vegetable soup at home, the likelihood of you putting that much sodium in is quite low.
So this Healthy Request soup?
Not so healthy.
Back at the grocery store, we give shoppers the scoop about this soup.
You think that's a healthy request?
It's terrible. It's terrible.
I'd probably rather have the potato chips.
They have healthy requests on here. It's got that much sodium in it.
Yeah.
How do you feel about the claim?
It doesn't seem healthy at all.
So, time for another label makeover. Let's turn Campbell's Healthy Request Soup into Campbell's Salty Request Soup.
When we...
Okay, so you get the idea again on that film. There's more examples if you watch the whole film clip, but the idea is that yes, they're not necessarily telling a lie, but there are ways and loopholes around making something appear healthier than it is backed up by fact. And sometimes that, again, that has to do with the portion sizes or the way things are represented. So there's some other good examples in that film. I would encourage you to go back and look at it more completely on your own. Okay, so now let's talk about this, the next assignment that I have for you here. So let me zoom in on this one here. This is using the claims, oops, sorry about that, the definitions that are on the right here. So what we have across the top are four, I will zoom in on the top part here. So we have four different claims for reduced, excellent source of calcium, good source of fiber, cholesterol free, and all of those have a definition to them that can be found either in your book or in that Colorado State University handout that I referenced earlier. So what we're doing now is we're taking label by label. So the first label is a tomato soup label, the second label is a crunchy oat bran cereal label, and then the third one is some American cheese, and the fourth one is some bread. So looking at the facts on each label, you can determine whether it meets the legal criteria for these products based on those definitions. So let's just go through those a little bit so you can see. So if we're looking at the first label, which is our tomato soup, so let me again zoom in on that one. Sorry, I know the copy is not, it's difficult to see, so hopefully yours, if you download it from the site, from the Moodle page, it might be a little clearer. So this one's talking about, in the dark panel, that is hard to read on this slide, again apologies, the top of the slide, you'll see it talks about this product contains 450 milligrams of sodium versus 710 in our regular soup. So we know that there's a reduction in sodium. So the term reduced can reference anything, calories, sodium, sugar, whatever, but it has to follow the definition for that particular nutrient depending on which one you are using. So this particular product would fit the criteria for reduced in terms of sodium, and would also fit the criteria, it does not fit the criteria for an excellent source of calcium, because this product has 0% calcium. It does not have enough fiber to be considered good, but it does meet the dual definition for cholesterol free. If you look at the definition for cholesterol free, it has to it says less than 2 milligrams of cholesterol. So it doesn't have to be 0, but less than 2 milligrams of cholesterol and 2 grams or less of saturated fat. And the reason that it has to meet both of those to be called cholesterol free is because many people don't realize that it's the saturated fat in food that impacts your cholesterol more than the cholesterol content of food. So that's important to note. So that soup, for example, would really only be able to use claim number 1, which is reduced in terms of sodium and cholesterol free. And then we go through the other product labels to see which claims can fit for the cereal, the cheese, and the bread. So if we look at the cereal, it does not meet the criteria for reduced because there's no. It has to tell you, if something's reduced, it has to tell you what it's reduced in on that package label. This one does not have that. It's not an excellent source of calcium because, again, the calcium is too low. It does meet the claim for a good source of fiber, and it does meet the claim for cholesterol free, and so on. So you can see those products. Again, we can go over these specifics in class if you're confused or not sure about how to tell that. But it's really just a way to relate the legal definitions for the marketing part of the package compared to what the facts tell us on the back. Okay, let's go back out a little bit there. Almost done. Okay, actually let's go back a little bit. Before we leave that, I just want to reference another worksheet that I gave you. So let me pause the camera for a moment. Okay, here we go. So this is the worksheet that talks about calculating the calories from nutrition facts labels. So if you remember back from our first class, we talked about the calorie values of our macronutrients. And our macronutrients, again, were our carbohydrates, protein, and fat. And hopefully you can see here a review of what those calorie values are. So every gram of carbohydrate you see in a package has 4 calories. Every gram of protein has 4 calories. Every gram of fat has 9 calories. So as you're looking at product labels, you can actually calculate the total calorie value if you do the math out based on grams of each of these nutrients times their factor. And the calories, to know that they're accurate, if your total number of calories you calculate is within 10% of what the package label says, that's considered pretty accurate because they round up or down grams, and so it's not always going to be exactly the same. But let's look at an example here. So I have an example of Annie's mac and cheese. Widen that just a little bit so you can see. So, okay, so I took an Annie's mac and cheese label that has 47 grams of carbohydrate, 10 grams of protein, 4.5 grams of fat per serving. So if we do the calculations and we put these into our equation, so we say, okay, let's take the 47 grams of carbohydrate times our 4 calories per gram is 188 calories are coming from carbohydrates in this product. And then our 10 grams of protein times our factor of 4 means 40 calories come from protein. And then our 4.5 grams of fat times our factor of 9 gives us 40 calories from fat. So when we put all those three numbers together, 188 plus 40 plus 40, we get 268 calories in a serving of Annie's mac and cheese. Now the package label tells us there's 270, so that's considered pretty accurate because it's definitely within that 10%. So then I gave you another example where I was talking about a serving, 1 cup or 1% milk, and again I got the numbers here, 12 grams of carbs, 8 grams of protein, 2.5 grams of fat. So again, if we do the math out, If you fill this into your spots, 12 grams of carb times 4 would be 48 calories from carbs. And then 8 grams of protein times 4 would be 32 calories from protein, and 2.5 grams times 9 would be 22 from fat. For now, just ignore those numbers on the side. I'll come back to those in a moment. But if we look at the equation, then we're putting in our 48 plus 32 plus 22 is 102. And most 1% milks have anywhere from 100 to 105 per cup. So again, we know that that's pretty accurate. And then the bottom part of the sheet, I asked you to find your own label and practice putting in what the product name is, what the serving size is, find the grams of carb, protein, and fat, do the math out times the factor, and then add all those three numbers together and see how your calories compare to the calories on the product label. All right, I'm going to pause this to flip it over for a moment. Okay, on the back side, now what we're doing is looking at the percent of calories that come from each of those three components. Now, logically, if you know those are the only three components contributing calories, and we want to know which percent of calories is coming from each of the three, when you add the three back together at the end, it should be right around 100%. In other words, 100% of our calories are coming from one of those three sources. So to use our example from our Annie's mac and cheese, if we take our 188 carb calories divided by our total calories, in this case the denominator is always the total calorie number. So 188 carb calories divided by 268 total calories means 70% of our calories are coming from carbs. We take our 40 protein calories divided by the same denominator, 268 total, and we get 15% calories coming from protein. And then the 40 calories from fat would again be another 15% from fat. And when we add up our 70 plus 15 plus 15, we get 100%. So this is a way to tell what where the distribution is coming from all of our calories. And this becomes relevant because when we talk about what our calories balance should be at the end of the day, we normally think about a pie chart that I show you in class that says 50% of our calories more or less should come from carbs, 20% more or less should come from protein, 30% more or less should come from fat. Those are simplified numbers. We'll go over those in a lot more detail in the coming weeks. But the 50, 30, 20 is roughly the estimated distribution of what you want to see. So this gives you an idea that something that's 70% coming from carbs means that's a pretty high carb food. And on the lower side from protein. So other choices in your day need to balance that by being higher in protein, lower in carbs, etc. So that's how you would do to see if at the end of the day you can come out to somewhere in that vicinity. So then as we scroll down the page, using your example from part 3 on the page before, you would be able to do the same thing. Your total calories would all be the denominators, and you would take each of your 3 calories that you found and see how close you come to 100% on that. Now if I go back for, and then you can answer the question, how close are the calories you calculated to the calorie stated on the label, and how close is your total percentage to 100%? And if you don't match that closely, if it's not within 10%, you might have made an error. Or the other thing that happens sometimes when you have products that talk about net carbs, it does get a little bit messed up. The math doesn't always work out because of the term net carbs, which we won't go into right now, but just know that makes it a little bit funkier. So I'm going to pause for a second because I want to show you, go back to that milk example we did just before. Okay, so we're looking at our milk example here again on the front side of this. And remember the numbers I said to ignore for the moment. If we do the same process, we take our 48 carb calories divided by the 102, we get about 47% of our calories from carb, 32 divided by 102 is 31% from protein, and 22 divided by 102 is about 22% from fat. And when we add up all those 3 numbers, we get 100%. So again, that tells us that our numbers are pretty accurate. So it's important that I want you to understand where the numbers come from on a label. Not that you're going to necessarily go around and calculate all your own numbers all the time, but if you understand the source and origin of the numbers and how they fit together, it helps give you a clearer concept about how our different food choices add up at the end of the day. So if you don't get the math, again, we'll go over it in class because you're going to see it again, and I want to make sure that you know that you're comfortable with doing those kind of calculations. So the last part of this chapter talks a little bit about antioxidants and phytochemicals. this is where we talk about, in terms of food choices. If you remember back, we talked in the very beginning about how we feed our pets dog chow, cat chow, etc., because we know roughly what their needs are, and we can put it into a kibble and feed it to them every day, and they're happy to have that. We don't eat like that. We eat a variety of foods for a variety of reasons that we've discussed before, and so we want to make sure that we get that variety in our diet to have balance and adequacy and so on. But the other thing is that there's a number of compounds in our foods that we're still discovering. We don't know everything that's in our foods. For example, phytochemicals is a whole big group of nutrients that we didn't even know existed a couple of decades ago. And on page 62 in the controversy section of your chapter, there is a huge list of those phytochemicals, and on 64, what the potential health benefits are in the food sources for those compounds. So in order to understand the basic premise of this, oxidation is damage that's done to your cells. So every day we get, inundated by things that are damaging our cells. So things that come in with the food that we eat, the air that we breathe, the fluids that we drink, things that are in our environment that travel into our bodies along with everything else that can do damage to our cells. If you're a fairly well-nourished person and the amounts of those assaults on your cells aren't too great, you can take care of it. Our bodies are made to handle damage, routine, everyday damage like that. We replace and repair cells all the time. So it's not a problem. However, when you have someone who's compromised in their nutritional status, whether it's from malnutrition or medical conditions that stress certain systems, and or you have a source of these oxidative chemicals that are attacking in larger doses than normal, then sometimes your body can't keep up with the repair and replace functions, and some of those those damaged cells take hold and start to replicate, and that's when we get into trouble with potential tumors and cancer growths like that. So oxidative damage is something we deal with every day. We have the ability to repair and replace most of the time, but there are these compounds in our foods, these phytochemicals, are an extra layer of protection. They help protect our cells from damage, almost like a shield over our cells, to make it that much more difficult for those antioxidants, for those oxidative compounds to do damage. So antioxidants protect our cells from damage from the environment. It may help prevent certain diseases. So these are what we call our superfoods. And again, we didn't even know these existed, a generation or two ago. So this is why we always want to go for food first as our primary source of nutrients. So this slide here just gives you an example of some of the compounds. When we talk about eating the rainbow, you can see the different color schemes for different foods that have these particular compounds in common, and yet we can't exclude foods there are compounds in the so-called white foods, onions, garlic, things like that are also beneficial. So it's not just the bright colors, but all the different colors in our food supply give us some beneficial phytochemicals. But you notice most of the sources are fruits and vegetables primarily. So these are the ones that are going to be strongest, which is why we always emphasize people need to get more of those fruits and vegetables. So those are our helper foods that really protect us from future damage. Okay, and just to end on a little humorous note, I can try to zoom in on our little funnies here. Finally, a food label I can understand. Each serving contains 10 grams of fat and 5 grams of thin. And then the other one, ingredients, chicken, eggs. Hey, the chicken did come before the egg. So just trying to put a little label humor in there. But you get the idea, hopefully, of some of the key concepts of where our numbers come from, how to read a label, how to do some calculations. And now we can move on to start looking at systems of the body and individual nutrients in a more in-depth way. So thanks for listening. I hope this was helpful.